Good morning. Welcome all of you to this seminar, the opening of the seminar. It's the 6th seminar by the Elcano Forum on Global Terrorism. This is the 6th year. This is being transmitted by streaming. And please be careful with what you say, because there may be 100 or 200,000 people watching you, listening to you. And there's a hashtag F that you can see up on the screen, FETG6. This is a seminar that began in 2013, and it has become the annual point of reference to discuss all of the trends in global terrorism and international and domestic tourism. As a result of the major jihadist movement since 2012, we wanted to focus on radicalization processes, especially in the context of prisons. The Elcano Forum on Terrorism is able to be held owing to the program on violent extremism and global terrorism, which is unique in Spain, as being led at the Royal Elcano Institute by Carola Garcia Calvo and Fernando Reinares. And also I'd like to thank the Embassy of the United States, and we have here with us the Deputy Chief of Mission, and please thank the Ambassador for this collaboration with the Elcano Institute and for its support for this seminar. One year again, we are holding this at the International Institute, and I want to thank the International Institute. I've been admiring this institution for many years, and I was a professor here when I was younger, and we are very happy to have the collaboration of Ana Botella, the Secretary of State for Security. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, for accompanying us at this opening. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Deputy Chief of Mission of the American Embassy, and then we will go forward with this seminar. Thank you. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today in such distinguished company for the 6th year in a row. The Embassy has participated in this seminar on global tourism organized by the great Royal Elcano Institute. I want to begin by greeting and thanking Emilio Lamo de Espinosa, President of the Royal Elcano Institute. He's a great friend. And for also to greet the Secretary of State for Security at the Ministry of Interior, Ana Botella. And I'd like to thank you all for this very magnificent forum with such high-level participants. I also want to thank all of the members of the audience too. I want to thank our speaker, Lorenzo Vidino from Milan. He's the director of the program on extremism at George Washington University, which some of you may be familiar with. He will tell us about radicalization and de-radicalization in U.S. prisons and the common challenges that both countries faced. The threat of terrorism has evolved and requires constant vigilance. It's evolving, and we need to be able to have the sufficient resources and resources such as this seminar. Terrorism has evolved and is now a great challenge. It has demanded and will continue to demand unprecedented cooperation amongst partners and allies in this fight. and no country can fight it alone. It's a constant battle, constant fight among friends. For this reason, the United States is very proud of having Spain as one of its closest partners in the global fight against terrorism. Two of our agencies, especially the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, share on a daily basis a deal of information with the Spanish authorities, especially about known terrorist groups, individuals linked to terrorist commandos, and to terrorist recruitment networks. Our legal experts are working with Spanish prosecutors on solidifying evidence and establishing criminal cases against every suspect, sometimes presenting joint cases, others presenting similar charges in U.S. courts. Nevertheless, and ironically, it's not enough just to discover and arrest people guilty of political violence. Now, even behind bars, they're another threat in radicalization. Prisons can become a threat if they become fertile ground for diehard jihadists to propagate their ideology. The danger is that inmates being held for other crimes may be attracted by the call of jihad, and they may come out of jail, of prison, even more motivated by violence. The radicalization process inside prisons does not involve indoctrination by well-formed, well-schooled imams, but rather by self-taught, self-proclaimed imams. These young people are able to Islamize the pre-existing radicality of other inmates, giving religious patina to their rebellious desires to make them feel like they have become brothers and heroes, and it helps them continue to reject the established order. However, I think we need, and the United States is committed to this, to renew our efforts to spread the rule of law, defend political freedom, and press for basic human rights, especially among populations that are the most vulnerable to extremist ideologies. Education and access to new opportunities are essential to counteract terrorist recruiters. For this reason, we are supporting organizations at the local level that promote social pluralism and religious freedom with a view to building more resilient, more inclusive communities. I have spent a great deal of my career in the Middle East, and I know that a young person with employment and a future for his family is much less open to violence. For this reason, the work this is important. This is an important challenge to Americans. It's a titan job, and we are seeking to. We have to continue this fight together, and we hope to continue with partners such as Spain and other allies. And I hope that the day will come, inshallah, that we don't have to think so frequently about our common challenges, that we must fight together. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister, especially for this explicit declaration of the will to cooperate that is underway and that must continue in the future. I'll give the floor to the Secretary of State for Security, Ana Botella.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair of the Real Instituto Elcano. And representative from the U.S. Embassy, I've taken note of many of the things that you said, which I totally agree with. When you talked about the titanic task we all need to take on together, I totally agree. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the Embassy of the United States and the Real Instituto Elcano. This is the 6th time this seminar is held. It's wonderful that we can continue to hold this kind of activity so that we can think about this threat and strengthen ourselves against this threat. As you know, the Security State Secretariat is the body that's responsible for promoting and coordinating the actions of the ministry when it comes to combating terrorism. Our structure has those powers, and that's where we have to reinforce our capabilities. The information services of the law enforcement agencies, the Center of Intelligence Against Terrorism and Organized Crime, SICO, which is under the purview of the Security Secretariat of State. And I would also like to talk about prison workers, because that's what we're going to focus on today. They are all the pillar of the work that the Ministry of the Interior does to combat terrorism. We must constantly acknowledge that effort, and I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work of what the law enforcement bodies have done in Spain to adapt to these new forms of terrorism. And I would like to acknowledge the work of the whole team. I've been in this post for just 5 months, and I would like to acknowledge the work of all the professionals at the Secretariat of State, which are top level professionals, and I think that it's always good for society that we have such good professionals at our ministries. In Spain, since the March 2004 terrorist attacks in Madrid, there are over 700 individuals who've been arrested for their links to terrorism, jihadi terrorism. One of the last operations took place in October. 2 alleged terrorists linked to Syria were arrested. This is recent, and this is something which is ongoing. There have also been arrests in other countries where individuals were linked to Spain, 11 countries, and over 100 arrests since 2004. To analyze terrorism, we have to say that this threat is faced by all of Europe. Of course, here we watch Europe closely because of where we are, and this threat is also strong in Spain because the threat is still present even if Daesh has been defeated in Syria. So these groups are still active, and we have to take this threat very seriously. This is the general framework. We're always very transparent. We don't want to alarm our citizens, and on our website at the Ministry of the Interior there is a part devoted to the Security Secretariat of State, and you can always see what the level of threat is. The level of threat which is determined by the experts at our law enforcement agencies. As you know, since June 15, 2015, our level is 4 out of 5 when it comes to assessing that threat, and that's a high level of risk. So we have a committee to assess the threat, which meets weekly. Our experts assess the threats against Spain, both on Spanish soil and close to Spain, and there's a confidential report which is sent to the Ministry of the Interior, which is who decides on the level of the threat, and the insecurity is reinforced according to the level of threat. Let me tell you about what our policies are to combat those threats. When it comes to returnees and foreign fighters, that's something we focus on constantly. According to our latest figures, there are 234 people who've been displaced and identified in our country. 57 are presumed dead, and 44 are supposed to have returned to Spain. What is the risk of these terrorists? Well, they are a risk because they've been in combat and they have combat experience, but they can also be they have a role model for young people in the Muslim world. And there's also the problem of radicalism when it comes to returnees. When we compare across countries in Europe, we see that most of the latest terrorist attacks in Europe and in Spain were carried out by people who'd been radicalized in our countries. They hadn't been in conflict zones, and that means that we have to work on that. We should all be aware that the threat doesn't just come from faraway places. We also have to work at home. When we combat radicalization in Spain, we look at things globally, and we think that's based on our successful experience in the past. In addition to law enforcement bodies, we need the involvement of other departments, other government departments, and also we need other areas to be involved: health, education, the justice system, and we need to particularly focus on the local aspect of things. There needs to be good coordination, loyal cooperation among the different administrations, the regional administration and the local administration, and Spain hasn't always been very good at that. Local administrations can contribute a lot through municipalities and through activities that can be carried out by the Spanish Federation of Municipalities and Provinces. And let me mention here two strategies we're working on. First, a strategy against Spanish strategy against terrorists. It's not something completely new. It picks up on what was done in the past. The last program concluded in 2017. We should have put this new program in place more quickly. But now, 2018, now that we're in the government, we're redefining the strategy to fight terrorism. And what I'd like to say about this strategy, and I said this at Parliament, it's going to be under the purview of the Department of National Security. As you know, that department coordinates all the national strategies, and we believe that while it's the Ministry of the Interior who has to promote this should be part of the Department of Security. It should be part of the National Security Council. And we're working, we have a timeline. We want this strategy to be adopted before January 30th, 2019. And I know some of the experts are working tirelessly in order to refine that strategy, because time is of the essence when it comes to fighting terrorism. Time is an incentive for us so that we can always be prepared. We know there is no zero risk, but all the structures, all the mechanisms have to be operational at all times. And we're also reviewing some specific plans based on this strategy, such as the National Strategic Plan to Fight Violent Radicalization. It was adopted for the first time in 2015, and it has to evolve and to adapt to the priorities in the European Union priorities. And we're working on that too. We've also pushed for full integration of regional police forces, the Erchancha and the Mossos de Escuadra, so that they're integrated at the CITCO, the coordination mechanisms that we have for databases on organized crime and organized and terrorism. So technologically, it was possible, and now before the summer, that integration was completed, and now we have all the mechanisms in place. We're also enhancing prevention. There's a directive for PNR, and the directive should have been transposed. Spain is behind. It's not the only country that's behind. And we're working very hard to have that ready in time. Otherwise, we might be subject to penalties. There's a bill that's almost complete. The Secretary of State, Security Secretary of State will be responsible for that, and we hope that very soon, and the Vice President constantly reminds us of this, that we will have that ready very soon. I would like to add that we also focus on two very unique mechanisms in Spain: cooperation on the part of citizens and testimony from victims of terrorism. As you know, there is a coordination center on radicalization, the CCIR, which is managed by the CITCO, and over the past 3 years, just to give you an idea of the activity, we've received over almost 7,000 messages from citizens. 34% were of interest for the police, and over 150 police investigations were opened. Among those investigations, there were 14 returnees. I think this is a good example, and the issue of victims of terrorism is also important. Unfortunately, because of what happened in Spain with ETA terrorism, we had to strengthen society. We had to make society more resilient. We had to pay attention to victims. And when it comes to jihadi terrorism, that means that what they have to say could help to counter radicalization among the youngest people in our society. We're very consistent with what the European Union is doing when it comes to radicalization. There are two plans at the Security State Secretariat through the Penitentiary Secretariat, and you'll be hearing about that later. And a lot is also being done, and the embassy just mentioned that. It's a great effort. It's part of that titanic task. It's part of a reality where it's difficult to work. This is something that we need to take into account, and it's the risk that radicalism can be spread in prisons. We have two plans, as I was saying. The plans were initiated in 2014 and 2016. If you're not familiar with these plans, there's a classification of inmates according to their radicalization. Groups A, B, and C. In Group A, we have 131 inmates that are being judged for terrorism, that have been sentenced to terrorism. In Group B, we have 39 inmates who are being watched because they could become recruiters. And in Group C, we have 82 inmates who are passive subjects of radicalization. So that's 252 inmates. That's the latest figure, which are in this monitoring program for radicalization. We also work, and this is another challenge because different countries in Europe have different methods, and in the US as well. It's important to share experience. So we follow inmates in Spain and out of Spain because they will leave, and when they leave, we have to follow up closely on all these issues. There was a recent operation, the Escribano operation, carried out by the Civil Guard. It was very successful. The French Minister of the Interior, who was in Madrid this week, asked us about this operation because it was one of the first purely penitentiary operations. And there was a network of 25 inmates in 17 prisons, and this shows how professional the Civil Guard and prison workers were. I think this is a fascinating topic, and it's very hard for me to keep it short because there are a lot of things which I would like to convey. I'd just like to say that we're working on this, we're working actively, and we're using all the mechanisms that are within our reach. And I'd like to say this also to the Embassy of the United States. We're reliable partners. We've been partners for a long time in this area. And when talking to my aides, we came to the conclusion that we face, just like all Western societies, we face the threat of radical Islam. It's a real threat against the democratic order in Spain and in Europe. It goes beyond terrorism because it generates unwanted social divisions. This could open cracks in our societies, and it could put at risk the idea of integrating minorities, and that would separate people in ghettos, and that could be a problem, as we've seen in France. Global data show that Islamic radicalization and jihadi recruitment take place among second and third generation Muslims. In Spain, the trend that we see is an increasing trend of dissemination of extremist ideas. So we have to act in prisons to be efficient in the fight against radicalization, and we need active measures to de-radicalize individuals and groups of individuals who've already been radicalized. To de-radicalize in prisons, we need imams who are authorized to work in prisons to be involved. I imagine you're going to be dealing with this issue. This is something of great interest to us, and we think that there needs to be a selection of the imams in order to avoid a radical rhetoric. International cooperation is absolutely necessary. We see here the importance of that cooperation. The Real Instituto Elcano works internationally, and we can't do this alone. As the representative from the embassy said, we have to work together, and no state can take on this phenomenon, which is a cross-border phenomenon. So we need international cooperation, and we also need cooperation among intelligence bodies. The state's resources are limited, but if we pool our efforts, we can do much more than just one player acting alone. I think this is a lesson that we've learned, and this is something we need to remind ourselves of. Even if we're very good alone, we won't be able to do much. Institutions in Spain function. So beyond the strategies that we need to work with the will to implement those measures, and that's the commitment that the government of Spain has. So I wish you the very best. I'm very sorry not to be able to stay, but since I know this is being broadcast by streaming, I will listen to this presentation whenever I have a chance. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you to the Secretary of State for her detailed rendition of her department's projects and plans. There's certainly nothing more important in our societies than to fight jihadist terrorism. There's nothing more relevant, and therefore it can count on all of the society's support, especially support from the Royal Elcano Institute. And I want to thank the Secretary of State for the collaboration of her department to the Royal Elcano Institute in carrying out our work, which is research and communication. It's not on the operational level, but it's important, and we do this all together. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Minister Counselor. Thank you to the Secretary of State. And now we'll go on to the first panel, Jihadism and Prisons. An analysis on the case of Spain. We'll be hearing from Carola García Calvo, Fernando Reinares, and Álvaro Vicente, and the chairperson will be José Luis Serrano.